Hey, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. I'm Matt.
And I'm Tim, and we greatly appreciate you watching this video. Please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our weekly emails on MrMaple.com. We had 10 new fun, exciting trees every Tuesday at 10 a.m., so that's something you'll definitely want to check out.
So Tim and I are going to try a new series where we do some shorts, and we basically answer some of your most commonly asked questions about Japanese maples and other plants that we do here at the nursery. Today's topic is, can I grow my Japanese maple indoors?
Japanese maples, they do great outside in zones 5 through 9. In containers, they do great outside in zones 6 through 9. People often want to bring their trees inside during the winter, and the question is can I grow them indoors? So Matt, can you grow them indoors?
So I'll quote the great Chris Rock, where he says, you can drive a car with your feet, but it ain't a good idea. And I think that's a perfect analogy for this. Yes, you can, but it's not ideal. So Japanese maples need protection in containers, especially in zone 5. So in zone 5, you're going to want to protect those trees during the colder winter months. But for most of the world growing Japanese maples, they're better off outside, except for extreme changes. So you're going to want to protect those trees, even in zone 6, in extreme changes in weather. But for the most part, they're going to be happier outdoors.
And so when we're talking about a tree in a container in zone 6, we're talking about a tree down to -10 degrees. If you're getting below that, you might want to bring it into an unheated space in a garage or a basement, somewhere where they get some natural light. You could definitely do that. You can definitely bring in other things you can do to protect them in containers, is to overwinter them by putting them up next to your house, but don't put them so close to the house that they're under an overhang where they don't get any natural water. Because during the winter, Japanese maples need water during the winter, just like they do during the spring or the summer. You can actually have them freeze dry in a container if they get no water. So you can actually pull them up in a container and set them next to the house. Also, you can bring in some mulch or some leaves to insulate that pot, to keep that pot warmer during the winter months.
So in that zone 5 garden, if you're going to keep them specifically in containers, we do recommend wintering them in an unheated shed or an unheated basement, somewhere where you're above freezing temperatures, but you're below leafing out temperatures. So what you don't want to do is create a false spring for those trees. And what I mean by below extreme freezing. So you want it to be above the 20s wherever you're going to store them, but below somewhere in the 40s to 50s. I would say below the 50s overall is the idea there. Once you get to those nights where you're getting the root temperature into the upper 50s and upper 60s, that's when you're going to start to break bud. And so if you can keep those temperatures lower, you can keep that tree in dormancy for the full winter in the container. Now, in those colder zones, it may be easier to go ahead and plant that tree. It may actually be a much easier system for you to have that in the ground. A lot of times people come to us and they try to overwinter Japanese maples in zones where they don't really need to. Like, we'll talk to someone maybe like in an area that's warmer, say Nashville or Atlanta, and they're saying, I've brought all my Japanese maples in for the winter, and you're going to cause more harm than good doing that in those zones.
Now, one thing you can actually do, like Matt talked about, if you're wanting to plant one in the ground, say you're in a colder zone, you can actually plant the container that you normally grow it in the ground. Put that in the ground so that the natural dirt will insulate the plant in the ground outside. That's an easy way to do it where it will get natural water. It's important to remember that if you are bringing them into a warmer space, Japanese maples require so much chill hours, so many chill hours during the winter, so that they can re-leaf out and really thrive and do well the next year. And so if you're bringing them into a warm situation, they may re-leaf too early. And then if you put them back outside at that point, you can get some damage on them from letting them leaf out too early. If you ever get a Japanese maple to leaf out early by bringing it inside, you have to wait till the threat of frost until you can put that tree back outside into the garden atmosphere outside again.
Yeah, and with deciduous trees, especially with Japanese maples, there's only a certain amount of time they want to be in leaf. They like that rest period. It's good for Japanese maples. And so if you keep a tree continually in leaf, at some point that foliage is going to look less than desirable. And it's going to be treated more like an indoor plant, which can be a little more challenging. Again, can it be done? Yes, it can be done, but it's not a good idea. So typically with Japanese maples, we recommend getting them outside, keeping your containers outside, but bringing them in only occasionally in zones where it doesn't require that during those extreme changes. So if you know you're getting a late frost, if you know you're getting a particularly hard freeze, those are the times when you want to get your tree back indoors. Now, for the people that are storing their Japanese maples in containers inside, so that zone 5 people is what I recommend doing that. Those trees, you want to make sure you give them some incremental water throughout the winter, because Japanese maples out of leaf still do require some water. So if you're storing this in a shed or a basement, you're going to want to at least water at least 2 times a month, and good drainage is the key there. So you want your tree to get watered, and times where it's above freezing, let it completely dry out, and then water it again. But you don't want it to a stage where it's staying bone dry all winter with no water.
And those saucepans you put underneath are not your friend for your Japanese maples. Whenever you put a water pan underneath a pot, what's going to happen is it's going to drain through and it's going to sit in it. And if you leave that there, you can actually get root rot, phytophthora root rot on your plants by letting them get too wet, especially during those winter months. So definitely avoid doing that. Our number one recommendation is always to overwinter them outside, either in the ground where you can put the pot itself in the ground, or where you can put your pots together and bring something to, like mulch or leaves, so that they can get natural water outside. That's always going to be the easiest on the plant when it's under its natural conditions. Often when we bring them inside to a barn, an unheated garage, which is a way you can definitely do it, you have to remember to water. The plant requires your care during those months. Where if you put them outside where that they're going to get natural water,
it's a lot more forgiving.
It's a lot more forgiving because they're used to the water that nature provides, which means that they can often fend for themselves rather than your own remembering of watering them during those winter months.
Yeah, this applies specifically to people zones 6 through 9. Now zones are really rated, you've heard us talk about zones, but zones really apply to how cold it gets. So the East Coast sand maples work zones 5 through 9 is a pretty good example, because once you get past that zone 9 Florida, it's a little too hot for maples, but it's not always a perfect example.
Because people in zone 10 can actually grow it in California.
Aaron Dragseth has trees in full sun, zone 10, California, but it doesn't get too hot or too cold. So it's a different climate there. And so you have to look at your heat index a little bit. So the upper side of the zones are always a guesstimation, because they're really related to how cold it gets. Now, keep in mind, if you're in that zone 6 through 9, you really don't need to bring them in too much at all, except for extreme changes. So for the most part, in zone 6 through 9, I definitely recommend getting them outdoors. We're zone 6B here at our nursery. We're in the mountains of western North Carolina, and we don't heat our greenhouses at all. They're actually in cold frames, and we keep the doors open most of the year to get the trees shut down, to get them as dormant as possible, and to not create active root systems during the winter month. And you're going to get more hardy Japanese maples when they're growing at a more moderate pace and cared for properly in those winter months.
Now, this isn't a video at all on should I bring my Japanese maples in when there's a frost. That's a completely different topic.
Yeah.
Because bringing them in during a frost means that the plant is already in leaf. And we're looking at bringing that plant and protecting it from a late freeze snap or a late cold snap. We'll probably do another video on that later. But this is simply for overwintering, meaning the plant's going dormant and we're taking it inside. And we don't recommend that. You definitely can, but it's not really the best idea. Like we said, the best recommendation we have is for overwintering your plants outside. That way they get water and everything that they need.
I'll get a lot of people that are, say, in Raleigh, in a heavy zone 7, maybe even zone 8 in some areas, and they'll say, hey, I bought this Japanese maple in a 1 gallon in November, and I think the safest way for me to do this is to overwinter it, and they'll put it like in their sunroom until spring. And so that's not ideal for that. Like, you'll have much better success rate if you're keeping that tree outside, even in a shadier spot outside, so you're not having to worry about how dried out the pot is getting, and somewhere that's getting some natural water. So if you have an area where that can happen, that's typically ideal. Like Tim said too, planting the pot is the easiest way. So if you don't want to commit on where you're putting that Japanese maple, but you don't want to overwinter it inside, actually putting the pot in the ground, now don't want to forget it because those roots will grow through there, but if you can leave it, in a short time frame over the winter that way, that's one of the easiest ways to overwinter one without the stress of having to put one inside. Now, again, I like to reiterate, zone 5 in containers do need protection, but zone 6 through 9, you're better off outside. You're probably going to do more damage than good bringing them in, except for those extreme changes.
Now, one thing to remember too with this, and Matt was talking about the really best way to do a pot in the ground is if you have another pot that matches it that it can slide into. So you can do a pot in the pot in the ground, and you can even turn it so that it still gets good drainage, but at the same time, its roots won't grow out in the spring when it first leaves out. And then you can pull it up, move it around anywhere in your garden that you would like. Whenever they put in the ground, they leaf out with the other trees that are outside. Typically, plants in containers in the sun will leaf out quicker than the plants that are in the ground. So that's something to keep in mind as well whenever you're doing this.
For sure, and something to keep in mind, Tim touched on it, but I'd like to reiterate, if you do bring that tree in, it all depends on what zone your house is too. So it depends on how cold your house is staying. And that varies everywhere amongst every person. I mean, I might not even like the same temperature as my wife. So it's going to vary what degrees your house is staying at. And so that changes that zone a good bit. So if you're keeping it in an area where it's staying cooler, that may work. But if you're keeping it in an area where you're keeping it above 70 or 68, that tree is going to leaf out. And then you're going to have to incrementally like create a shutdown period for that tree before you can take it back outside, or retain it inside the rest of the year, which is really the safest thing at that point.
And the other thing you have to do is keep in mind that it needs natural light. We have this one room at our house, at my parents' house, that we called the tater room. It would actually keep things down cold enough where it would actually get its winter cold during there. But the problem is it doesn't get enough light. So if the plant begins to leaf out in the spring in there, the leaves are going to leaf out almost white. And then if you move those out to the sunlight, they're going to get burned.
Yeah, it's going to have kind of a deficiency of chlorophyll there, and your foliage is going to be very white. So if you are leafing them out in the spring, even in that zone 5 garage, you have to be conscious of slowly increasing that light amount so that you're not burning it.
And you have to wean them onto the light with morning sunlight, and then incrementally giving them more and more each day until you can give them that full sun.
Also, plants love humidity, and typically our indoors just don't have the right humidity for a Japanese maple. It's gonna dry the container out immensely being inside. You're gonna want to compensate for that, getting the circle of death below it, and it just is a bad combination. So
and humidity in the house dries out the plants so much. There's not much humidity in your house. Where there isn't a cold frame like we have here, we still have to water it during the winter months.
Exactly.
We come in here and we check and see if the plants are completely getting really dry. Then we have to water again even in our cold frames, even though we have such a high humidity.
We typically water out of leaf here in zone 6B at least twice a month, if not 3 times a month in the winter. And what we do there is we wait until it's above freezing, and we give those trees that recovery time from the hard freeze. So it's a good idea if you know your tree's been out during a really extreme temperature change. Once it gets back above freezing, that's a good time to go ahead and water. Hey, we hope you've liked this quick look at this and a quick discussion on Japanese maples indoors. I hope this has been informative for you.
Please take a minute and like this video. If you have any comments, post those in the comment section. Or if you have any suggestions for other people who might be trying to do this, post those in the comment section. We greatly appreciate you watching these videos. And remember, before we close out, we've got a giveaway going right now for a hat. And what you need to do, like this video, share it, write in the comment section, I dig Mr. Maple, and you'll be entered to win a Mr. Maple hat. Thanks.
God bless.
And have a great day.